Ready to go on Lewisboro Hamlet. I think in former meetings here, I put out the fact that Lewisboro Hamlet could not have existed as Lewisboro Hamlet until John Lewis gave the town enough money for the town to rename itself after him, and that was in 1840. So prior to 1840, there was no formally named Lewisboro Hamlet. It's always been kind of an enigma. It's been the lost hamlet. It's really hard to define. For today, we're going to define Lewisboro Hamlet as beginning at the intersection of Mill River Road and Smith Ridge, or 123, as either as the state calls it. So we're going to start the hamlet from Mill River Road, and it will encompass all the area from our eastern boundary to our western boundary until you get down to where Elmwood Road meets 123 or Smith Ridge Road by St. Paul's Chapel. It's a nebulous area. It goes down to Lake Kitchewan, and it goes over to the Wilton and Richfield border on the other side, on the eastern edge. So it's I've always called it the lost hamlet because it got itself lost over the town seal. But we're going to talk about that in just a couple of seconds. The earliest map that I've looked at was 1851, and there was a hamlet called Lewisboro Hamlet on that map, and the town also was called Lewisboro with an UGH after the BORO. So originally the town was Lewisboro with the OUGH. But in around 1890, the federal government put out a directive and had a committee set up to simplify the names of post offices and railroad stations and towns in general. And a lot of the towns, one of the things that law did was to take the UGH, take the UG off of the boroughs. And so that might be why Lewisboro in more recent maps in the 1860s and so on, and even till today, it's been just with an O at the end and not the OUGH. So with all of that behind us, let's go. Well, actually, I took this is the end of the southern end of the town, the entering Lewisboro Hamlet sign, and I thought there was another sign. I'm gonna lose my voice quickly, by the Mill River Road end, but there's no sign on the northern part of the hamlet. Here is our very fuzzy town map, looking like a shotgun. Here is the handle, and here's the barrel. And here is Lewisboro down here in almost the southeastern end of the town. We have Vista, Lewisboro, and then we have South Salem, Cross River, Wacabuck, and Golden Bridge. The different colors on the map are not hamlets, they're basically the school districts. But you can see very faintly on this map, and we'll see a better map later on, that Lewisboro, the biggest letters you can see say Lewisboro Post Office. So there obviously was a post office here. This map is from 1872. And there's a Golden Bridge post office, but you don't see a South Salem post office. You can see a Cross River post office. I'm not sure how long the Lewisboro post office lasted. I'll show you where it was on one of the later maps, but I have no records about that post office like I do of the other post offices in town. Here we have the Lewisboro seal, which was one of the projects during during the 1976 bicentennial celebration for the town. The town had a seal design contest. We hadn't had a seal up to then. 9 entries. There were 9 entries, and Owen Craighead, better known as Tom Craighead, won the design contest. And this was his winning design with a little bit of changes. The town board took his original entry, and by the way, Tom was from Cross River. His family, he lived in the house which is now the Cross River Vet and Kennels, and the Craigheads had kennels there for a long, long time. Anyway, Tom's original seal, as entered into the contest in 1976, had all 6 hamlets. It had Wacabuck and Lewisboro hamlet listed, but the town board, and also the town board decided that since the master plan had just been approved, and we're talking 1976, that the master plan designated these 4 hamlets that you see on the seal as the hamlets that would be commercially developed. They would be the ones where most efforts would be pointed to as far as commercial development. So they decided, all right, we're going to take out Wacabuck because it never will be a commercial development. And we'll take out poor Lewisboro hamlet because nobody really knows where it starts and where it ends. So there's no, it's just too nebulous. So the town board decided we'll do away with those 2 hamlets on the map. Tom Craighead had also had 3 words listed on the little outline there of Lewisboro, and those were the words intelligence, strength, and honor. Well, town board decided maybe instead of those words, they would put in a deer and the trees and the lake. Or I guess that's supposed to be a lake, although the deer is standing in it. Anyway, that's the reason for why the seal looks the way it does until 1996. And then the seal was amended largely through the efforts of a couple of people, but most importantly, this lady. And this is a picture of Catherine Baker, who lived on Elmwood Road, grew up, she was born, or she lived as a youngster down in the Vista part of town. And then when she got married, bought a house on Elmwood Road. I don't remember what service she was in, but she did see service during World War II. And this is probably a picture that if anybody is familiar with the Lewisboro Garden Club or anything else that happened in town having to do with Lewisboro hamlet, this is the Catherine Baker that we all remember. And she passed away several years ago, but this was the lady who got Lewisboro hamlet back on the map. And here is, I said there'd be a slightly better map, and let's see if we can bring it up, because there are a few things of interest. Here you see Lewisboro Post Office, and you'll see a little bit later, you'll see a picture of the store, and the store also would have had the post office in it. Behind the store, the store is on Smith Ridge Road, but this is Kitchewan Road, and as you go down Kitchewan Road, we're going to come to a chapel, and we're going to come to a schoolhouse. Chapel is very recognizable. The schoolhouse, unfortunately, with each new person that moves in and gets an idea how to make it bigger, it's totally lost any look of a schoolhouse, and that's too bad because it was a very charming little building. The other thing to note in this map are these lines right here, these little crickety lines. And for a long time, probably 20 years or so, there were people who wanted to push a railroad through our town. And there were 3 different railroads that I could find names for, but I would suggest if you go online, there is a lot of information about Westchester County's railroads. And the 3 names that occur that would have pushed through our town in this area, coming from the shore, like from Stamford, New Canaan, would have come into Vista around Puddin Hill Lane, which is the borderline between our town and New Canaan. And it would have come in, it would have followed the Mill River, which is, well, it's not really showing on this map, but it followed the Mill River Valley. And this particular railroad, proposed railroad, is the Ridgefield and New York Railroad. We're going to see on, let's see, I'll have to make that smaller. On this next map, now that map was a little earlier, I think, probably around 1900, a little before 1900. Yeah, that was the 1893 map. This is the 1905 map. Again, same area, proposed railroad. This time it's called the Porchester Danbury Railroad. I also have a brochure that was in my archives, and there was a technical brochure from the Stamford Ridgefield via New Canaan Vista Railroad, which is basically, it's the same railroad. And in one of the pictures we'll see later, you'll be able, with a good imagination, to see the berm. The railroad tracks never came through, but the berm, the buildup for the tracks did come through. You can see it along the Mill River, along Mill River Road, and you can see it across the state line as it goes into Ridgefield behind the wetlands, the new area that was just developed for Leon Levy Park on the eastern side of 123. So there we have the railroads, and the farmers did want the railroads, even though it was going to go right through a lot of people's farmland, a lot of people's property. And we're going to hear about George Shelton later on. He owned a lot of property. This is Spring Hill Lane going out toward Ridgefield. Here we have Elmwood Road coming down, and this is 123 or Smith Ridge coming down. Just to show you, this is the other end. This is St. Paul's, where St. Paul's Church wasn't built yet on this. This wasn't quite ready to be put on the map yet, but this is the rectory, which is at the junction of Elmwood Road and 123. We're going to talk about the Dury family in a little bit toward the end of this presentation. So keep the name Dury in mind. Austin, huge amount of property, acres and acres and acres. And this property at some point became or was part of the Southeast Farms, which occupied both sides of 123 for miles and miles. And part of this property, there's more Austin property, went into the area that became the Lake Kitchewan community. So this map has a lot of history involved with it. And I would say if you want to know more about the railroads in this area, and last time we talked about the railroad in Cross River, and we'll probably talk about railroads some more in Walkabout. So we could have become the Kansas City crossroads of America with the railroads that were proposed through here. Luckily, there was a downturn in the economy in the 1870s, and none of these came to fruition. So that was the railroad story. I figured that was the best place to get that in. But I thought we need to go back a little prehistory before we go any further ahead with our the European settlement history. But down here, down below, this is a mastodon tooth. This mastodon tooth is on display at the Trailside Museum. And this is where this background, this picture is from Trailside. And this is a mastodon. This is his tooth. or her tooth, for probably a youngster, and probably dating back to around 10,000 um, before current era. So 10,000 BC, thereabouts. As the glaciers receded, the Laurentide glaciers receded, um, there were life was able to come back to the area, and the mastodon was here. And on the the western side of Lake Kitchewan is where this bone was dug up. It was actually dug up in Pound Ridge, but since it was in what would have been 10,000 years ago, a much larger Lake Kitchewan, we're claiming it as part of Lewisboro Hamlet's history. There were several teeth, jawbone, some rib bones, maybe a few toe bones were found, not a whole skeleton, but what remains were found can be found at the Trailside Museum at Ward Pound Ridge. This is Standing Stone, which is on Elmwood Road, down at the southern end, just a little bit in. And this Standing Stone is purported to be, and probably is, an Indian standing stone put to mark the amount of ground that could be covered by an Indian walking from the shore, the Long Island Sound, in a day's journey.
Maureen, can you just zoom in on that for us, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, it's on the eastern side of Elmwood Road, and it's less than maybe it's a quarter of a mile in, or less than that, from the southern end of the road. And it's right near, this is a driveway here. It's right in somebody's yard. Well, it's on the roadside, but there's a driveway right here. So yeah, it's about 9 feet tall, and it, as I say, marks a day's journey for someone walking from the Sound. To stay with the ancient times, you're going to see these points, and this is a point. Some of these others they're called utilized points because you can tell under the microscope that they've been used. These were found in a dig known as the Schofield dig, which also would have been on the western side of Lake Kitchewan. All of these points are also part of the collection at Trailside Museum. There are thousands of them. And I know there are people living around Lake Kitchewan who have their own little digging sites, have found lots and lots of relics that might date back to at least 4,500 years ago, if not longer. And some of these are knives, which would have been, it's hard to think of as knives, but let me also explain this. This is a chart that archaeologists use when they want to take a photograph of something, because each one of these blocks is a centimeter, and 2.54 centimeters equals an inch. This is about halfway in here would be an inch. So 5 of these would be 2 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That gives you kind of a general feel for how big these are in real life. These are probably about an inch. This one is a little over maybe 2 inches. And the ones with the hatch like this are older ones. Here's some more. Again, utilized points. This is quite a large one. Some of these, when I was on a dig, I did a dig with this woman who has researched all of these. Her name is Lynn Marie Wheeland, rather, and she's an archaeologist and historian from Ridgefield. And we did a Ridgefield dig and found lots and lots of things that look like this. Probably these smaller ones might even have been used for fishing. Also used for scraping, which would have meant that, I don't think this one was, but these smaller ones would have been scrapers used to clean a deer hide of the fur and prepare it for tanning. And this is just a timeline that Lynn Marie set up with all the different points representative of a timeline going back probably to 45 or 5,000 years ago. And you can see, at least it seems that the older points, these would be the older points, and these are coming toward more modern times, maybe 1,000 BC rather than 5,000 BC. The older points are much more beautiful, much more beautiful. Okay, this excuse my drive-by car shot, but this is on Smithridge, the corner of Smithridge and Kitchewan. It's a private home, but it was the store. It was when Lewisboro Hamlet actually had a town center. This was the store, and this would have been the post office. Of course, it has an addition. It doesn't look the same as it would have about 150 years ago. This is, well, that doesn't work. Oh, I got to escape it. This is, okay, now I've got to put us all back here. This was the schoolhouse. And until about 10 years ago, maybe 15, it still looked like a schoolhouse. It's the third building in on Kitchewan Road as you're heading west. It's on the north side of the road. And it used to have a bell tower, and it looked like a one-room schoolhouse, but it's been totally enveloped in modern architecture. Before you get to that schoolhouse, I should have switched these pictures around. You'll come to a chapel, and for in current times, the chapel was the studio of a very wonderful sculptor named Ivan Giro, and this was his workshop. And it's interesting because in the Big Blue History book, all of a sudden I was looking through that. Oh my gosh, that's not the picture I took the other day. This is the picture I took the other day, and this is the same chapel. Obviously, the doors are the same, the window placement is the same. What's missing is the bell tower. And here it's called the Union Chapel, but it's known, and what I've known it always as, the Band of Hope Chapel. So I don't exactly know what era that Union Chapel was, or whoever made those. That was a postcard that had been written on when it was published, and I'm not sure what the Union Chapel was. I've seen it in diaries called the Band of Hope Chapel, and it was a place that there would be ladies' meetings there, maybe dances. As far as the denomination, haven't a clue, except in researching Band of Hope. In England, there's a temperance society, and it's still extant, called the Band of Hope, and it's a temperance movement. So I can envision that there were several temperance movements long before Prohibition, and perhaps at that point there was a small congregation that belonged to this Band of Hope Society. There's very little information on these chapels, so we'll go with the Band of Hope, and that it was a gathering place during the early 1900s, because I have mention of it in a diary, the Dury diaries, which we'll talk about later. Another church in the still operating in Lewisboro Hamlet is Stephen's Memorial Methodist Church, which has does a lot of things for the community. It's a small congregation, but a very active one, and they do lots of wonderful things. When they can, they have a 4th of July antique sale every year. And they have a Saturday morning gathering. Well, they can't do any of this now. Saturday morning gatherings for people to just come and talk about Lewisboro. And over here, I don't have a very good picture of it, but this was the original bell taken from the memorial, the Methodist Episcopal Church, that if you were at the Vista Zoom, you saw in the Vista Zoom, the church next to Vista Market. And the sign here says, this is the original bell on that church. And the church was built in 1857. But when that church was kind of condemned, I guess, as far as for services, and this property was given to the Methodists, they moved up and built Stevens Memorial and named it in honor of people who had given the property. Here we have St. Paul's, which I'm not going to talk a whole lot about. It was consecrated in 1900. I think I kind of mentioned it when we were talking about Vista. So the money for the church, or the property, was given by John Lewis, because the part of the property was his grandfather's farm and where he was born. Didn't live here all that long. During his teenage years, he kind of got busy going to work for various merchants. So, but he did give the money to get the ball rolling on St. Paul's Chapel. Robert Bolton, who was one of the ministers or priests at St. Paul's and St. John's, was the one who did a lot of the work toward getting this chapel built. It's bell given by Boss Tweed, and I think we talked about that. There are 2 cemeteries that I know of. I don't think I've forgotten one. This one is on Smith Ridge Road. It's actually on private property. And it's the Northrop Caldwell Cemetery. There aren't too many graves on here, and the landowners do keep it up. And although it is on private property, and if you did want to go visit it, I think you would have to contact me and I'd tell you who to get in touch with. But it's basically members of the Caldwell and the Northrop families. There aren't any, it's a family cemetery. There aren't any town burials in here that I know of. Now we're going to take a little trip down Elmwood Avenue. I say Elmwood Avenue because that's what it was called when all the elm trees hadn't died off yet. And it was a magnificent road with farms, mostly farms. This was the farmhouse of the Raymonds. And it is, I don't know, it's not too far in from this. We're starting at the southern end. St. Paul's Chapel was at the very beginning. This is a little up from St. Paul's Chapel on the western side of the road. And the story about this lady, Lucy Raymond, and her friend is not identified, but Lucy lived in that house, and Lucy Raymond farm produced a lot of eggs and milk back in the days when you could sell raw milk to your neighbors or to anybody who wanted raw milk. They could buy it until in the 30s, and the pasteurization laws came out, and no longer was unpasteurized milk allowed to be sold, at least to the public. And so Lucy had the honor system, and she was where you went, I guess up on her porch or out in the barn, and you took your eggs and you left your money, or you took your milk and you left your money. And it said that Lucy was a very shrewd business lady, because if it happened that her hens just weren't laying that day, she would sneak into Stamford, buy some eggs, bring them back, sell them as her own. So, but everybody loved Lucy Raymond. Next, we're coming to, this is the home of the Pittas, at an Erling Pitta, and it's on the eastern side of the road. This home I asked Pat for a little background on it, just because unfortunately the houses in Vista Hamlet, I mean in Louisville Hamlet, don't have the histories attached to them that a lot of the houses in South Salem do. So it's what the diaries or homeowners have garnered about the history um, of the house. But this house was built around 1860 by Hiram Boughton. And there are a lot of Boughtons in the Vista and the Louisboro and the South Salem and the Ridgefield area. But anyway, this was built by Hiram Boughton and owned by the Boughton family members and the Raymond family members. Everybody was cousin to everybody else. And one of the most well-known of the owners was William Boughton, and he named the house Laughalot Cottage. It's kind of hard to see. There are the three upper windows, and the configuration is about the same, but the porch is gone. And there have been a lot of additions and changes over the ensuing years from 1860 to 2021. But William Boughton, and I would assume this is William over here. Yeah, because that looks like a lady when I look closely. William Boughton was a tugboat captain and an old salt, and I guess had a good sense of humor and really loved the house and named it Laughalot Cottage. The house was eventually sold out of the Boughton family, and it was sold to a man named Edward Horvath, which is the next person that we'll talk about. And Edward Horvath bought the house in the in the 1930s. He had a sister married a nephew of the Oscar Mayer, a meat mogul person. And in her little notes, Pat said, this could be another urban legend. She doesn't know, but possibly Susan Horvath's husband conceived the invention of the, whoops, we're going to go to and come back, the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. So it could be that the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile was birthed right here in Louisville Hamlet. So the hamlet may be nebulous, but it's full of interesting things. This being one of them. On the Horvath property, and this is still toward the south end of Elmwood Avenue, as it was called then, there was an observation tower built, and it was used during World War II for a very brief time, basically December 1941, just after Pearl Harbor, until March of 1942. There were 285 people who signed up to spend 2 or 3 hours, 24 hours a day on duty to watch for enemy airplanes. And this was a card that was made up as a kind of a business card to, as it says down here, your name would go type in here because you're an airplane observation volunteer. And as I say, those people in groups of, I think in groups of 3, maybe 2, would climb the tower dutifully, spend 3 hours in the tower, looking for airplanes and reporting their sightings to another control tower. And eventually it would get to mission control someplace on Long Island, and they would keep track. During all those months, there were no enemy airplanes seen flying over Louisboro. Louisboro remained safe because of all these volunteer people. But actually, toward the end, the beginning, it was slow. There were slightly over 200 airplanes observed in a day, but toward the end in March, over 700 airplanes had been spotted in one day's patrol. Let's see what's coming next. Wire. This is the Wakeman home, and when you go past this home, it's a few houses down from the Pitta house, which we just saw. Wakeman Farm was a huge farm and covered both sides. There were several Wakeman farms along Elmwood Road. And there's a Wakeman Road. The Wakeman family was quite important to the hamlet. And here, I don't know how many people are going to recognize this. This is Onatru, the earliest picture that we have of Onatru Farm. Possibly when Alice Lane Poor's father bought the farm in 1904. But it's come a long way. There's a well out in front. It's only half of what it is today. So we're going to look at it in this was probably around 1900. We're going to go up to the 1940s. And this is a very grainy picture. It's the picture that's in the big blue book, but I don't think it was a good picture to begin with. Notice house has totally more than doubled in size. And in this picture, it has an open porch. Nowadays, this porch is the sun porch. It's all closed in with glass louvered windows. And from up here in the attic, if you happen to know the right people, you can go up a rickety old ladder and climb out, and you will still be able to see Long Island Sound. And that is part of the reason, because Lewisboro Hamlet is the highest hamlet above sea level in the town. It's between 700 and 800 feet above sea level. Depends on where you are in Lewisboro Hamlet. It kind of gets higher as we go toward the northern end. Notice these little pine trees. Alice's father, Edward Lane, really was into agriculture. Actually, he was a principal in the Mapes Fertilizer Company, and his company imported guano from South America, shipped it into the United States, and was the main part of the Mapes Fertilizer Company. But he had his bucket brigade in the 1930s and put his kids to work planting, his kids being Alice and Walter, being the grandchildren, I guess, planting these trees along the other side of the stone wall. Elmwood Road is behind. There's a stone wall here, and there's Elmwood Road, and then Onatru. And these pine trees were magnificent for a long time, but have not done too well lately. And I don't think all, but most have been cut down. It's so familiar, you kind of forget what your eye is seeing. Walter Poor, Alice's son, was an amateur pilot and had his pilot's license, and you can kind of see the strut of his the wing strut. But about 1940, Walter took this aerial view of Elmwood Road, of the farm, Onatru Farm. This is the farmhouse up here with a few changes. This is the little building out. Here's the circle behind the house. I'm not exactly sure what's happening here, but this has definitely been changed. This is the barn, the maintenance barn. This is the little rental house in the back. This is the driveway in past, and this is all parking lot now. There's a soccer fields. Driveway in behind the maintenance barn, out here to the rental house, and out here. And I don't know if you're still on, Timmy, but here's our chicken coops, our chicken houses. Here's the cow barn, the big cow barn where the attic treasures is. All these little buildings are gone. This is small barn across from the big cow barn, which is kind of behind which is now where the town has their outhouses. But this is what it looked like in the 1940s. There was a change here because you're going to see in another picture, there used to be a windmill here. So I'm assuming Walter did this around the 1940s. The trees have grown. These pine trees have grown. All right, now we're looking in that former picture, we were looking west toward the farmhouse. Now we're standing behind the farmhouse, This is the rental house. This is the big barn. This is the chicken coops. These are various pig barns and other, maybe sheep, various other livestock barns. But this was the windmill drawing water out of, well, it was an artesian well. I can't say that it's a windmill because I don't see anything windmilly about it, but it was the structure on an artesian well. And there were, I think, at one point on the farm, 3 of those structures. Here's a picture of Alice Poor. The title on the picture was head of civil defense. So I'm assuming that picture was taken in the 1940s, the early 1940s. Alice Poor and Alice Neargard from Wacabuck practically won the war by themselves with their home civil defense activities. So this is a really sweet picture of Alice in not her youth, but in her womanhood. And now we see Alice at her 90th birthday party. Again, kind of a grainy picture, but that's in the living room at Onatru. And at this point, she was living at Alton Craig nursing home, old age home in Ridgefield, and had come back for her birthday party, which was a huge gala affair. If you want to see more of the party, join me in my office for the scrapbook. This was Alice in her 90s. For those of you who aren't familiar with Alice Poor, we could do a whole program on Alice. Besides being in charge of civil defense, she was on the Lewis School Fund. The Lewis Fund, after Lewis bought the town with his $10,000 and his stock and what have you, for the betterment of the schools, the fund, the monies were set up for the good of all the schools of the Lewis children in Lewisboro. When Lewisboro merged with Bedford, the money could no longer go to all of the schools because not all of the schools had children from Lewisboro. When it was just the one-room schoolhouse, every one-room schoolhouse got money for awards and for various upkeep. But the Lewis Fund had 4 or 5 administrators, of which Alice Poor was one. And then toward the 50s, getting into the late 50s, she bugged the town board. She said, "We don't need this fund anymore. Please, I want to retire. I want to get off this fund." And the fund, being administered by a committee, was then given to the town board to administer. As far as I know, that's how it went. But during World War II, Alice was out making bandages, holding Red Cross meetings so people could learn how to do all sorts of things in case the war actually did come to Lewisboro and we needed all sorts of home defense. So she was active in the school, she was active in politics, she was active in starting the Lewisboro Garden Club. And very, very much involved with the Ridgefield Garden Club, so much involved that they gave her quite a number of awards. So she had her finger in many pies, and it was even though it was a humble finger, it was a very, very well-directed and intelligent finger. So the town owes a lot to Alice Poor. This is the Gilchrist House. And I'm not going to say too much about this house, except between this house and the next, which is, I couldn't get a good picture of both of these objects. This is the tower. This is still on Elmwood Road. It's a couple of houses down from Onatru, going north, about the 3rd house down, because there are Ketchum houses in between. And I don't know who lives in those houses, but there's another farm in between. Anyway, this tower area and this house were involved with an interesting story that Grace Poor, Alice's daughter, told me, that during Prohibition, there was a little bit of revenuing, a little bit of industry going on here in the spirit making kind. And one evening or early morning, there was a huge explosion and the process blew up, and gallons and gallons of sugary water were spilled all over the place. Sugar, whiskey, whatever. But anyway, there was a large explosion, which was one of the memorable experiences of Grace's life as a teenager. So that's why the tower is still there and the house is still there, but the spirits are gone. Now we're at the very end of Elmwood Road. This house is on the western side, the corner of where Elmwood meets Spring Hill. Spring Hill or and west, at that point, I guess it's called West Lane. This is how the house looked in the 1940s when the Armistead family bought it. It belonged to the Olmsted family out of Ridgefield, and it's purported to be one of the oldest houses in our town, probably dating to the very early 1700s, maybe 1680s. I don't have any historical other than hearsay from I guess Karen Armistead, who was the wonderful lady who lived there and for a long time. But that's when her father bought the house in 1940. That's what it looked like. This is what it looked like the other day when I drove by. It's been changed quite a bit since Karen lived there about 20 years ago. But I think there's a family in there now that really appreciates one of the oldest houses in town. And they don't have Karen's green thumb. Karen kept that corner in beautiful, beautiful flowers. But I think these people look like they have a love for this house. Now we're going to take a little right turn at the end of Elmwood Avenue, or Elmwood Road as it is nowadays, and head down West Lane toward Ridgefield, because it's still Louisville Hamlet. We haven't gotten to the Mill River intersection yet. And this is a newer interpretation of houses that were here. Actually, this wasn't the grand house, which was part of this property. This is on the north side of West Lane. And it was around 1900, a very large, apparently awesomely beautiful house was built by a man named Dr. George Shelton. He was a homeopathic experimenter. He was head of the Homeopathy Society of the United States, and apparently a very successful doctor in New York City, because he retired at age 47, moved up here to Louisville Hamlet, and built a magnificent house. It had to be extremely magnificent, because what he did was build this as his guest house. This is a house that's still standing. It's on the south side of West Lane, on the corner of Stonewall Court and West Lane, purported to be, and probably was built or designed by the Stanford White organization. And it was the guest house. So if this is the guest house, you can imagine what his house looked like. Unfortunately, his house was bought. He died in 1926, Dr. Shelton, and the house was bought by a man named Mr. Doubleday from Ridgefield, who I think if you might find some Doubleday roads over in Ridgefield. And whoever Mr. Doubleday was, not the book Doubleday, but whoever he was, he knocked down Dr. Shelton's mansion and built his own, which is actually over in Ridgefield. Dr. Shelton owned 750 acres on this highest level of Louisville Hamlet, which extended into Ridgefield, and he named it the Orchard. And some of the apple trees apparently had very exotic trees, and some of the apple trees and the crab apple trees are still there. All right, I'm sorry for this picture. I can't get it any bigger. I don't know what happened to it. Even if I zoom in, it's not going to get any bigger. But this is on West Lane, West Lane. Yes, it's the Kohler House, and West Lane goes from 123 and meets up. It's actually the extension. It goes into that road that we were just on. It's the beginning of West Lane, which just segues into West Lane after Spring Hill comes up. You need a map or a GPS. Anyway, the Kohler House is an old house. I'm not sure of the exact date, but the reason I wanted to talk about it was, again, now we're Lewisboro Hamlet actually was a pretty amazing place during Prohibition because there were several stores that sold the revenuer's supply, and this was a hotel. It was the Kohlers ran it as a hotel. In fact, the road, which is West Lane, as I kind of stumbled on and said, used to be called Kohler Road, spelled like my name with an ER added to the end. And probably because this was a pretty ongoing and popular establishment. I was given a tour of the house, a bunch of years back, and all the upstairs bedrooms have little numerals next to them, as you would find in a hotel. But during the 1930s and the late 20s, during Prohibition, it was a popular place. And apparently the alcohol and arms and control guys found out about it, staked it out, pretended to have their car break down in front of this house. And when the people inside getting their bar supplies came out and offered to help the stranded men in their car, they were all arrested for illegal possession. So that's the reason. I'm sorry it's so small. It shouldn't be small, but my camera was playing tricks on me. Anyway, this was taken Friday, so the house looks the same, except it's bigger in real life. We have one landmark house, Lewisboro Landmark House in the Vista Hamlet, and this is the Eli Rundle House. The only good picture I had on hand was its advertisement when the Kerr family bought it. Richard and Doris Kerr bought this house. Whoops. And apparently they bought it for something like $60,000 back in the 1970s, perhaps, and maybe the 60s. I don't remember, but it's circa 1763. The Kerrs did a lot. They love this house. They did a lot of research on it, and they named it the Eli Rundle Farm because Eli Rundle was a farmer at one point. He may have been the one that built this house. Don't have a lot of story on the house, but if you live in an old house built before 1850 and would like to become a Lewisboro landmark and get yourself a plaque for your house, give me a buzz. But this is on 123. It's up near the Meadow Pond School, and it's behind a stockade fence. It's really hard to see it. You have to take a quick peek down the driveway to see the house, but it was in disrepair for almost a decade, and it really had fallen into rack and ruin. And about 5 years ago or 4 years ago, people started getting interested in it, and actually the early people interested in it wanted to tear it down, and we really didn't want it torn down. Finally, a builder with a little eye on history and the future did take it over. He's changed a lot inside. It's much more open floor plan than it should be and was back in the day, but at least it's kept its outside shape, and it is very beautiful inside. Here we have the Ferris House. This is the Gideon Ferris House. It most recently was the district offices for the Katona-Lewisboro School District. And it's vacant right now. The school district has moved all their offices, I think, to the high school. They kept moving them around for a while, but they're no longer here. This place is empty, but it was built, the main part of it was built after the Revolutionary War, the more modern part, by Colonel Ferris, who as I said, came just to live here just after the I'm saying revolution, it's revolutionary, not Civil War, after the Revolutionary War. So it dates back to the last quarter of the 1700s. One of the claims to fame, though, of the Ferris family is this. This is the 1893 exposition, the Chicago Centennial Exposition. Huge, if you've ever exposition in Chicago, built on a reclaimed swamp. It had a crystal house, and it had this 250-foot diameter, 36-car Ferris wheel designed by George Washington Gale Ferris, who is the great grandson of Colonel Ferris of the Ferris House. So if you want to extrapolate a little bit, you can say the Ferris wheel may have had its birth by its relatives here in Lewisboro Hamlet. And if you've ever read The Devil in White City by Eric Larson, you'll learn a whole lot about this Ferris wheel. Here we have West Wind. West Wind was built around 1900 by, and the first known owner was a lady named Annie Bell. And the scuttlebutt always says, well, she was somehow related, probably a daughter of Alexander Graham Bell. As far as I could figure out, going back, reading autobiographies of Alexander Graham Bell and doing some other slight research, he had no daughters named Annie, first of all. And one of his daughters married the Grosvenor, who was instrumental in starting the National Geographic. But Annie Bell is just another Bell, and not related to the Bell of the Bell property, which is now Leon Levy. But she lived here, and when the property went up for sale, it for a time was the Rene Chardin French restaurant, and then its most recent iteration was the Jewish Family Congregation, and now it's somebody said the other day what it was. It's another. I think it's another organization. It's not. It hasn't gone back to private residence, but it dates back to about 1900. It's a beautiful, beautiful mansion built around. There were several of these places built. There was Dr. Shelton's. There was this. There was Dr. Kraft's of the Black Mansion, and there was Le Chateau for William Rainsford. So there were a lot of these large, almost look like Newport cottages built in our town back around 1900. You couldn't afford Newport, I guess you could afford Lewisboro. Now we're going to take a look at several families in the town, in this particular part of town, in Lewisboro Hamlet. This house used to be on Shady Lane. It was the Davis house, and those are the Davis children in front of the house. This house, the reason I'm showing this house is it's just a typical house of a typical family trying to make ends meet. And this house, this dates pictured to about 1900, 1910. The house itself probably dates back to the 1700s. And the reason that I even wanted to show it is that if you ever are walking one of the pathways from the Onatru estate across the western side of the property and the trails on the western side, you will come across a Boy Scout Eagle Scout project. The house was totally gone. It had, I think, probably burned down years and years ago. But about 10 years ago, an Eagle project was done on this house. And these are some of the artifacts that we found. This was part of a stove. I think if we, all right, this is part of the stove. This is some sort of a bucket, a wheel. We found, in my barn, because I have all of the artifacts, as well as in my office, there are lots of rusty pieces, lots of window glass. Some of the window glass is maybe 20th century. Some is 18th century and 19th century. We found the original handles of the door, which I didn't have ready for this picture, but we found bicycle, which dated to its more modern era. But there is a plaque on one of the trails leading from the Onator Reservation to the site of Christoph's Eagle project. So if you want to take a little hike, it's above a stream. It's an interesting foundation, and it's all been dug out, but there still might be some glass, so be careful. Here we have the Mill River Hotel. And let me see. Mill River Hotel is right at the corner. We've finally gotten ourselves to Mill River. And this house was built by Amy Keeler for his son Henry Keeler in 1833 in honor of Henry's wedding. Didn't quite look like this because the veranda and the porte cochere and some of the other parts of this house were added long after 1833. But the Keeler family owned all the way from the corner of 123 and Smith Ridge Road, where the traffic light is, all the way down along the Mill River into the Mill River Valley. But this was Henry Keeler's house. But upon the Keelers all passing away, the house was sold in about 1899 to a woman named Helen Sullivan. And she ran the house as an inn from about 1899 until 1925. This happens to be a postcard. And as you can see, it says Mill River Hotel near Ridgefield, Connecticut. Well, the Ridgefield historian got very confused, and he called me up and said, could I possibly identify the Mill River Hotel? Well, yeah, because it's not in Ridgefield, it's in Lewisboro. People keep getting our two towns mixed up, even though it's been 220 years since we were both the same town. Anyway, this was Henry's house, and it was a hotel until about 1925. It may have seen some activity during Prohibition. Not sure whether Helen was involved at that point or not, but it became eventually the house of the Welch family. Dan Welch, who was our town councilman, I don't know if he grew up his entire life here, but his mom Gloria raised dogs here. She raised Dalmatians. She bred Dalmatians and Newfoundlands. A great combination. But Gloria was the one that I first met when I knew about this house, and she was the one who would tell stories about being visited at least once by strange men, strangers who would come up and wonder if she'd let them dig in her yard because they were looking for a car that had purportedly been buried in the yard, and they wanted to know if they could dig it up. And I'm not sure, nor was she, whether they were looking for bodies or money, or maybe leftover bottles from the 1920s. Now, this was a Keeler property, and all along Mill River, now right here, we have to orient ourselves. I'm standing on Mill River Road, and I'm looking out back toward 123 up here. This is the Mill River coming down. This is one of the Kohler mills. There were two mills on the river. There was a sawmill and a grist mill, and the Kohlers were in charge of them both. There also was a blacksmith shop. And during Helen Sullivan's time with Mill River Hotel, the blacksmith shop was no longer needed as a blacksmith shop because everybody had gone from horses and carriages to cars. The blacksmith shop became a tea room known as the Ripples. And I think it also sold other things and served other things besides tea at that time, because I found an article in Priscilla Lukow's favorite place, the Katona old newspaper stacks, online stacks in the Katona Library. But I found an article about a little bit of government activity at the tea house. But again, there were two mills. This is part of the sluiceway or whatever for one of the mills. And there was there were two mills, there were several cottages, there was a blacksmith shop, and they all, after the Kohlers' time, they all kind of fell into disrepair. And the area became known as Ruinville. And this, it's very hard because this is just all kind of wooded area. But I took this standing with my back to traffic on that little bridge just before you get to Mill River Road on 123. I'm standing on 123 on this little causeway, this little bridge right at the bottom of the hill by the Mill River Hotel before you go back up the hill on 123. Anyway, this is the Mill River flowing south. And this is where the railroad would have come through. This is actually, let's go back. This is where the berm was for that railroad. And it's a good time to look now because there's not a lot of understory or vegetation. If you stand on Mill River Road and look across the valley, you will see areas where that railroad berm was built, and that was all. It never went further than that. But looking down here, this is, you have to go down a ways, but this is the Mill River, this is the valley, and over in this area, as near as I could figure from the map, is where the blacksmith shop would have been, and the tea room. And this whole area, because of its decrepitude, was known as Ruinville, excuse me. Oh my goodness, here we are. We are in Bedford Corners or whatever. I hope you recognize Jimmy Stewart. This is an outtake from It's a Great Life. And I think the people who live in Lake Katona still enjoy and think it's a great life. Got this picture from the Lake Katona Association website, which is a really neat website with everything you need to know about Lake Katona and lots of interesting links to other parts and things of interest to people in town. This was an outtake. This was on that website, and this was an outtake from It's a Good Life. Some people have thought for a long time that Bedford Corners in the film might have been Bedford Hills, or at least another town in northern Westchester. And in this outtake, somebody has constructed a little road sign saying Chappaqua this way, Katona this way, Aspatuck, which is actually the name of the mountains, if you can call it a mountain range. The mountains, there's an Aspatuck mountain between Ridgefield and Lewisboro, and Kitchewan this way. So this is kind of a neat thing to think of. Maybe our area served as some sort of a background for that film. Now we'll go to the real Lake Kitchewan. And this is the picture from back probably in the 40s, just of the lake itself. Now, Lake Kitchewan was, the Lake Kitchewan Park was started to be developed around 1925. And a gentleman that we saw in the Vista hamlet who put up all those tar paper covered small houses down where the Vista Commons is now, Oak Ridge Commons, was Dr. Bryan from Ridgefield. And he also was associated with the group who were developing the Lake Kitchewan Park. The park was set up with, from part of the property was Southeast Farms property, and that was at Austin, that huge area of that was owned in part by the Austin family. And also another a lot of area, a lot of it was that area. And then the Lake Tacona Grove, which was sort of toward the north end, and the which would abut the Bell property, the Crafts Leon Levy mansion property. 1,250 lots were set up at 50 by 100. And people started buying. And they didn't have electricity for the first few years, because I remember once talking to, interviewing Katie Haug, who lived in Lake Kitchewan for 40 years. And her husband was part of the group that brought in the electricity in 1928 or 29. So for the first few years, those early pioneers in Lake Kitchewan made do with kerosene, I guess, no electricity. Here's another picture from that website, Carlson's General Store and Casino, and a boathouse. And I think there was a porch off the back end. Built around 1946 and destroyed by fire in the 1970s. These look like early 1940s, late 1930s cars. And here's a kind of just further over, so you can see the sign on the casino, where I think upstairs was kind of an open area and they could have dances and parties and things like that. You get your Schaefer beer, your Philip Morris, and have fun party times too. And great, you can go to the beach. The beach is just over this way. And you could also have, I think this was a 4th of July celebration, because this lady, it's not Halloween, because in another picture from this series, children are in shorts and t-shirts. And in their costumes. Well, this lady is dressed up as a clothesline, and she is wearing, I don't know if you're of my vintage, you might remember the slogan for Does Detergent, does everything. She's wearing the detergent on her head. Her dad is pinning up the rest of the clothes, and she's got clothespins here. She's a clothesline. And one of the reasons I chose this picture was right down here. This is a local conveyance. This is a vehicle of a Lewisboro Hamlet resident. But until about 1970, the early 70s, people in Lewisboro Hamlet and Vista Hamlet had Connecticut addresses. And so they could have Connecticut license plates. So this just reminded me, yes, there was a time not too long ago when even though it was New York State, this mail was delivered and you could get your license plate legally in Connecticut. This is a picture taken probably around 1950s of the War Veterans Memorial down by the beach. The entrance to the beach is just over here a little bit. And here are 2 scouts doing it honor, probably on Memorial Day. And here's a picture of it today in much better shape. I took another picture of this that I was going to use probably about 5 years ago, and half of the names were missing. So I can see where it's, this is again from the website, and it's a much more pleasing picture of the memorial. So let's see, we are going on to, oh, one more thing for Lake Kitchewan. Lake Kitchewan in the winter kind of picture that we don't want to see till next winter. Down at the south end of Lake Kitchewan, thanks to the Lake Kitchewan scholar and historian Ron Egloff, he took me to the Lost Village. Now, technically, the Lost Village is in Poundridge again. It's on the southwestern side area of the lake. And it was a village of 4 or 5 homes that existed in this area above the lakeshore. As I say, about 4 or 5 homes or 4 or 5 families, but it was in existence from about 1840 to about 1890. It's not known why it disappeared. Was there a fire? Was there another natural disaster? Was there an epidemic such as typhoid or smallpox or diphtheria? Anyway, for some reason, by 1890 or before 1900, anybody living in the town, the whole area, the whole little village had disappeared. And these are some artifacts that had been given to Ron from a long time ago, people who had been exploring down in the Lost Village area. It's a very interesting area to the Poundridge historians, as well as to the people around Lake Kitchewan. Here we have part of a lock, and this is part of a latch, doorknob, and this is a hoe. And whoever gathered all of these mounted them on these pieces of wood most likely from the foundation, the pieces of wood of the houses that were built there. The only record of anybody really in there, apparently it was big on huckleberries and berries and nuts and all sorts of things. And I think there may have been a basket maker in there, but about 1875, there was one mention made of a lady named Marie de Forest, who was admitted to the Westchester County Poorhouse in 1875 because apparently she was mentally ill, suffering from St. Vitus dance. But that's the only record that anybody has of anybody actually being sick and having to leave the village. Now, way back when I was showing the maps, I was saying, remember the name Duryea or Dury. Sometimes I've heard it just said Dury to say it fast. A while ago, I was given the diaries of Eliza, her sister, and her older sister, Frances Dury, and the diaries go from 1901 to 1941. It's not every year, and the other diaries may be lost somewhere else, but these diaries are incredible because you have to read them all to get really any sense, but it does give you a sense of day-to-day life in the Vista and the Lewisboro area. The Durys lived about 3 houses north of Beck Hill Cemetery. Actually, their house is next door. If you know where Susie Andrews lives, the house is just south of the Andrews house. And Eliza wrote of everything that was going on in her family, like who was coming to visit, every day she gave an idea of who was ill, who was visiting, who was well. One thing that I noticed, and it took me a couple of minutes to fathom this out, but her father, Seth, was very active in the town. He was a voting official, election official, I should say. And she mentions every year how her father, and occasionally when her brother got old enough, when Henry got old enough, how her father and her brothers would go to vote. And I'm thinking, well, why is she saying this? Why isn't she going to vote? And then I looked at the date of the diary, and it was before women's suffrage came in. So there were little things like that that you, as I said, it's reading the whole scope of the diary to just see how things change over time. One of the other diaries talks about how apparently her mother wasn't in the best of health. She may have been a hypochondriac, but she talks a lot about her mother not feeling that well and having headaches and all. And at one point, in the 19 early 20s, she talks about, well, we had to go over and live with our relatives in Ridgefield for a few weeks because they were blasting to build the highway. So that tells me when they were blasting to improve the dirt road that went from New Canaan to South Salem, 123. They were blasting to put in the road. There are also the family was very active in St. Paul's, St. John's in the Episcopalian Church. And Frances, the older sister, every Sunday would drive to the depot in New Canaan, pick up the minister. And one of the ministers was Alexander Hamilton the third or something. He was Alexander Hamilton's grandson, I believe. May have been I think it was his grandson. Anyway, he was the minister at St. John, St. Paul's Parish for quite a while. But Francis would drive into New Canaan, pick up the pastor, bring him back, bring him all the way to South Salem because their church wasn't consecrated yet at St. Paul's. He would do the services in South Salem and then come back for dinner at the Dury's house. And then she would drive him back to New Canaan. Well, it took me a few pages to realize she was driving in her buggy. And first we'll see a picture of, this is Eliza, who never married. She was a spinster, but she was the one who penned just about all the diaries except for the first one. And the first one was done by, this is Frances. Again, all of these pictures of the Dury family, and I have a lot, were found in a suitcase in the Harold Waite family home, which is down near the 123 restaurant. But anyway, these pictures are absolutely wonderful pictures, but they do not, they did not stand the test of time in the dampness in a suitcase in the basement of a house. But this is Frances, and this is how she drove to the depot in New Canaan to pick up the minister every Sunday. And this is how she drove him back. This is her mother, Susan, and this is the Dury house on 123 next to the Andrews house. The Durys did own quite a bit of property. They owned property down on West Road as well. At some point in the early 20s, though, Frances was given an old Model T Ford and taught herself how to drive or had took driving lessons. It may have been from one of the pastors who maybe wanted an upgrade from the horse and buggy. But the diary also has many tales of driving that Model T and having it break down and having to get new tires and fix the car before she could get home. So the Dury family was not one of the wealthy families, but they were a staunch, a very prominent family. And Henry Dury, Frances and Eliza's brother, was the one who had the Anvil restaurant. And he was a blacksmith over in Norwalk or New Canaan, and that's why he called the restaurant the Anvil. Something else I was going to say about Grace, but I don't remember. Anyway, a little bit about John Lewis, and we're almost done. And I haven't even looked at the time, so I hope most everybody didn't fall asleep. John Lewis was born where 123 and Smith and Elmwood Road come together. Not in that house. That house was newer than the house he was born in, but that was all Isaac Hayes farm property, and his mother was Margaret Hayes Lewis. And John Lewis had some feeling for his family, I guess, and or maybe he just wanted a place to spend his money. He was a very wealthy gentleman, having made it in, I guess what we call it today, the stock market. Um, and so he had money to donate. He was very interested in public schools. Public schools in the 1840s were becoming a very popular thing to support. And so if he could give some money to the town to benefit the public schools, he maybe could get them to name the town after him. So that did happen. In February of 1840, we went from being South Salem to Lewisboro with an OUGH at the end. He died in 1871. His wife had died about 20 years before. He retired about 1851, and it seems his wife died about that same time. She's buried over in Darien with her parents, and he's buried here. With his mother, I guess. It says in memory of Margaret Lewis, and his father is probably buried up in Clinton, where his family originated. But a little bit, John Lewis made all his money down in New York City, came back and decided to share some with our town. It's, I guess, in some places you could buy a town. The one thing we have of John Lewis, the one thing, we don't have a portrait. Supposedly there was a portrait that was given to the town and was hanging or kept in St. Paul's Chapel, but it has disappeared. Nobody in the last 50 years has seen that portrait. I know when Mother Lynn was the pastor, she and I talked about it. I climbed way up, and I think she had also climbed up in the bell tower to see if it might be up there. No, no portrait. But anyway, we do have a book that I found on eBay, and John Lewis, I am not sure. At the time of his death, he was writing the fourth of his books. And whether it was just that he was redoing the book, and this was the fourth edition, I can't believe he could find enough verbiage to write 4 books like this one. But it's called The Merits of Protestantism as Demonstrated in the Character of Man, Volume 4. The book is about 6 inches tall. We need one of those centimeter measures, but it's about 6 inches, maybe 7 inches tall. This is the title page. It was published in 1852, and it's the history of in various countries from the earliest recorded period to the present century. And it's got a gazillion chapters on all these different countries from the Near East to the Far East to Europe. And just one more thing I want to read about this. He had some testimonials in the front, but I want to read the testimonial from the Reverend Mr. Hatfield, because this kind of gets us into the brain and the thought processes of our eponymous John Lewis. And this is what the Reverend Mr. Hatfield of the 7th Presbyterian Church in New York City had to say about his good buddy, John Lewis. I highly approve the object of your forthcoming work. Popery denies, and we affirm, the inalienable right of man to freedom of opinion. Man, according to his original constitution, is a free man. He was made a living soul, an intellectual and moral being, an agent, a moral agent, and consequently a free moral agent. For freedom is essential to moral agency. A man cannot be a moral being who is denied the right of, and I'm afraid I didn't turn the page, but you can put in what man is being denied the right of. Anyway, popery, the dislike for the Pope and the Catholic Church was rampant about this time, and this was basically the tenor of the 400 or 500 pages of this book in small print. So that's our one treasure that throws us back to the life of John Lewis, even though this wasn't his, this was the book he wrote, it's inscribed to somebody else, but there we have John Lewis. Now, one of our other anomalies in town, one of our other attention getters, this lady, Martha Dodd Stern. And Martha Dodd Stern lived on Kitchewan Road. She was the daughter of, I think his first name was William Stern. It might have been Charles, who was Roosevelt's ambassador to Germany in the 1930s as Hitler was rising to power. And he was not, I'm not too sure. I don't know that he wasn't seeing all the faults of Hitler at this time. But anyway, he was over there for several years, and his young daughter, who was in her early 20s, Martha, was over there. His whole family had gone over, and Martha was at the age where anything with pants on looked pretty good to her, and she was a pretty girl. And so she struck up several liaisons. And there, at this time, as the 30s wore on, there were a lot of Soviet soldiers around, and she did fall in love with one of these soldiers, and Vladimir, and she hoped, her hopes were that they would get married, which did not happen. But having all this fondness for the Soviets, she offered her services to as be kind of a little spy and help them out. And the way she decided or proposed doing that would be to read all the embassy mail that came in to her father. This kind of whet her appetite for spying. And when the family came back to the United States before the war started, she continued in that endeavor. But before we leave her picture, again, going back to my good buddy, Eric Larson, who is an incredible writer, he wrote the book In the Garden of the Beasts, which is about Martha Dodd and her family when they were in Germany before the war. But his researchers working on his book did not really do their research well, and they had when they got to the Martha Dodd Stern being a spy part back in her own country, they placed her in Ridgefield because Lewisboro Hamlet had a Ridgefield address. But no way, they lived on Kitchewan Road. This is the house that the Sterns lived in. And they lived there from about 1943 to 1953. And about 1953, the government was starting to close in on Martha and her erstwhile spying activities. And so they began taking very long vacations to places like Cuba and Mexico, and finally left the country just before an indictment came down on them to set up residence in Mexico. But just a little bit about their spying. They got involved with this gentleman named Boris Moros, who was actually, he was a spy and a counter spy. He was a Soviet spy during the end of the wartime, and he also was spying as a counter spy for the United States. Anyway, Stearns, Martha Dodd had been married, Mr. Stern. He was wealthy, and they got involved with this Boris Moros gentleman on a music publishing business. And it was really kind of a money laundering business for whatever Soviet spying was going on. And this was also the time of the Rosenbergs. And McCarthy. It was big, heavy spy time in the early 50s. Anyway, Martha and her husband were very happy to be part of it. And apparently they did have some shady Soviet kind of characters visiting them at this house. The neighbors would talk about visitors coming at night quite often. A gentleman in South Salem named Elisha Keeler, who owned Happy Home Flowers, also did yard work for them. And I did interview him about the Dodds, and he said, "Oh, Martha was a wonderful, wonderful person. She was very happy. A few things he noticed about her, I mean, she was very gracious, was that she really never appeared before noon, and then she'd come out with her cocktail or her coffee, and she'd want to sit and talk with him. And he didn't find anything untoward about her. But Elisha was contacted by the FBI and given a set of cards of people to look out for who were under the FBI's watch list. I have those cards in my office, and one or two of them were nationally known people. Elisha said he never did see any of those people, and he said the Dodds, the Stearns rather, were rather nice people. They did keep in touch with Elisha because whenever they were away on one of these extended vacations, they needed him to do the house sitting and take care of things. This is an interesting article which just talks about the spies, again from the Katona Record archives. Boris Moros was a Hollywood character, was known in Hollywood, but did work for the Russians, but also worked for the Americans. And through his Hollywood and his music company, there was money going around. The falling out between the Stearns and Boris Moros was over the Chattanooga Choo Choo song. They split company. According to I'm not sure this article or another one I read, it was Martha who outed Morris to the Russians. Anyway, the Martha and her husband ended up first in Mexico, then with a Paraguayan passport. They fled to Romania, where over the years, as they both died. In 1957, the government dropped charges because there were no witnesses. All the witnesses who might have helped out had died. So in that case, the Stearns wrote to President Jimmy Carter asking to be pardoned. Carter never answered the letter, so they remained in Romania, and both of them died in Romania. Now, another newspaper character. This is Roger J. Stone Jr.'s headshot from the 1970 John Jay yearbook. Roger grew up off of 123 in Lewisboro Hamlet. His parents, Chubby Stone and Gloria Stone, were marvelous people. Chubby Stone, I think, may have been a charter member of the Lions Club. He definitely was the Lions Club Santa Claus for year after year after year. Gloria was a member of until she died, a member of the Vista Fire Department Ladies Auxiliary. She was a Girl Scout leader. They were pillars of the community. Roger had higher seeking plans, and as we can see by his headshot in the John Jay Statesman, chronic campaigner, the Stone Machine, Yellow VW, L'état c'est moi, his PA announcements, Government 69. That must have, he was president of the student council, and he held other positions in the school government. Nixon's the one. This is where he began to get involved with politics, and you can see that even in high school, maybe where he started learning his dirty tricks for Nixon, which he did, because there are some stories of him campaigning for Nixon earlier on, trying to convince kids in the lunch line with a little bit of a bonus if they would vote for Nixon in the school straw election. V for victory sign. There's another picture I didn't put in where his arms are totally spread out in a V for victory. Future plans, President of the USA in 1988, GO president. All right, there he is at age 18. Here he is. This also was taken a picture from the high school yearbook. There is his John Hancock, and he obviously had traveled down to Washington, possibly campaigning for Nixon or whomever. And there he is. He made it to Washington that time. And here he is more recently, last year, Trump advisor sentenced to 40 months. I need one more picture. I need the picture of his pardon. I'm sorry I don't have it for this show, but if we ever do Lewisboro Hamlet again, we'll have to put the Trump advisor, dirty trickster, to bed. Now, we're at the end, but we need a little ghost story for the end. And this is the other cemetery in Lewisboro Hamlet. And I'll have a bet that unless you've hung around with me for too long, you don't even know about this cemetery. It's at the corner of Grandview, the road that comes out of Lake Kitchewan and where it meets Kitchewan Road. It's the Wood family cemetery, and it only contains one grave. It's on a hillside. You have to climb up a rocky little hill from the road. It probably sits about 10 feet above the roadbed, and it has one gravestone. And this is the gravestone of Jacob Wood, who died around 1809. Jacob was a ghost. He was a ghost who appeared to a friend of mine, a woman that sought me out because she was being bothered by this gentleman who hung around the back end of her property. Her property was on 123 across from where West Lane comes out onto 123, right near West Wind. Her house was on the west side of the highway. It's at gable end to the highway. When her husband brought her there to show her the house that he wanted to have them move into, she had extrasensory perception, and she sensed a bad feeling about the house. But her husband wouldn't hear any of it, and they moved in with a teenage daughter and a toddler daughter, about a 2 or 3 year old daughter. And Emil was right. There were strange things happening. There were pots and pans sliding around the house. Her little daughter would wake up crying, saying, "There's a man looking in my window." She'd be awakened from a nap, and she was only about 3 years old, but she would call out, "Mommy, there's a man, there's a man." And Emil would see this figure, which she thought he was wrapped in chains, strolling around the very end of her property, which was way toward the west, going toward actually Richfield Avenue, and the properties there kind of come together. And she would pray about it. She would light candles. She would try to get the attention of this figure that kept appearing to her. And she finally did, with the help of a spiritualist, make contact with this man. And she also found out from reading that South Salem, the Big Blue History book, that a man named Jacob Wood had his wife, Susanna, and a young child had been, and I told this story, I think, at a different time. Definitely with my ghost stories. Susanna and her young child had been in a dugout canoe crossing a swamp near Cross Pond, going toward Lake Kitchewan, because the Wood property was in that area, and it was part also the Wood property and the Brown property there was a live producing program going on, and they were producing lye to be sold. And anyway, it was very swampy. And Susanna's boat capsized in the middle of this little pond, and she and her toddler were drowned. And Jacob, in trying, was searching for them, and had been searching for them since about 1776, and we're talking 1992. And this is when Emil had sent this present. So once she found out the story, she tried talking to Jacob, tried reaching him with the help of the spiritualist, and she did make contact enough so that after several months of talking and cajoling this man, she said she lay down for a nap one afternoon with the purpose of just trying to make Jacob go across that little border to the other world. And she envisioned Susanna standing on a hillside with a little child, and they were saying, "Come, Jacob, come," just encouraging him to make that climb. And Emil said she realized then that it wasn't chains that were adorning his body. It was like seaweed. It was grass and seaweed that had been hunched over his, cradled over his shoulders. And she watched as Jacob slowly climbed the hill, took the hands of the two figures at the top of the hill, and he went over, and it solved her problems because the spirit was gone. And that's the story of Jacob Wood and Susanna and their child. So with that, I will bid you all Easter greetings. I will just have to say Passover greetings as well, but I don't have a Passover postcard from the 1800s, the 1890s, this looks like the early 1900s, but happy Easter to all. And if anybody's still awake and my voice holds out, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Oh, one thing I forgot, going back to Dr. George Shelton, he started this organization called the Lewisboro Association, which had great things that it wanted to accomplish. And one was, and this was in 1910, school centralization in Lewisboro, police protection, curbing of drunkenness, and also to stop the selling of votes, which apparently was prevalent for a little bit of time back in the early 1900s in Lewisboro. I thought you all might want to know about that. Anyway, back to Dana, and if she has any questions, we'll give them a try.
Well, it looks like 2 or 3.
Okay.
Going back to the Mill River Hotel, somebody wanted to confirm the location of Dan Welsh's former residence. And I know it's on the corner of 123 and Mill River Road.
Mill River.
Right?
So you go down the hill. It looks exactly like that postcard did, except it doesn't have the full porch on all the sides. It's got the porch across the front, and the porte cochere is still there. It's the only house in town I know with one of those.
Yeah, they did a lot of work on it. It's beautiful now.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's Vater. I forget the name of the family that has done a lot of work on it, but they've really, inside and out, there was a lot of work because it had been used as a dog breeding place during Gloria's time, and because she was the only one basically living there. So Gloria and her dogs.
And
but
we got some new Zoom buffers on today. And in the beginning, you identified a house on Kitchewan that was near the chapel as a store. And it was a post office too?
Yeah, because most of the general stores were post offices. Wherever your little downtown was, every general store, that's where the post office was. It wasn't a separate place. It was in the store.
And that was the original purpose of that store. correct? Like our house, correct?
As a store, yeah, and then that's the postmaster would be the storekeeper, yeah.
Okay. And I think somebody said, I think you have misidentified the post office. It should have been the house next to or east to the chapel on Kitchewan Road, not the building on 123 north of the corner. Should I read it again?
I was going by the map and what I thought. Now they're saying the store was on Kitchewan Road.
I think you've misidentified the post office. It should be the house next to or east to the chapel on Kitchewan, not the building on
No,
123.
that's the school.
Okay, so that was the school.
That house that looked blue, that is blue, that was the school, not the post
House.
office.
Okay.
The post office was in the store.
And that was it, unless anyone has any questions from the floor that you'd like to unmute yourself to ask. Is the guest house at Onatru still rented out?
Yep.
It is. There's two
Yep.
town residents living there.
Go ahead. Talk.
One upstairs, one downstairs.
You can put your,
So I'm not, the question was not about the blue house. The question was about the White House to the east towards 123, which the early map shows labels as the
Oh.
post office and Mead store.
It could be. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not gonna quibble. It could have been. It could have been. You're saying the house where the Bureaus live.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I'll stand corrected.
Thank
And
you.
that would be good.
Anyone else with any questions, comments?
Maureen, I think you have to admit that Lewisborough is the single most distinguished hamlet in town.
Well, that's because you live there, right? Because your wife lives there.
Yes, now you understand.
It's definitely not a lost hamlet. It's just hard to find. Actually, Lake Kitchewan is part of South Salem Fire District, I think.
Yes, I was surprised you included Lake Kitchewan, not because I dislike it in any way. I think it's a wonderful little area. But I think they think of themselves as part of South Salem, except that a lot of them are members of the Vista Fire Department.
Right. And some of them are members of the South Salem Fire Department.
Yeah, but that's a
So-
mistake.
So it's very strange in there. But it kind of goes with the block that is Lewisboro. You know, the Lewisboro hamlet, it's kind of a rectangular place.
Now, what was it before it was Lewisboro?
I don't know. It couldn't, in an 1851 map that Lewisboro Post Office shows. I don't have an earlier map. I was going to go, it couldn't have been Lewisboro because there was no Lewisboro. And John Lewis.
Yeah.
The Lewis family was not important. The Hayes family was important. His
Okay.
grandfather. The
All
Lewis
right.
family was not important. Except going back to being the Hayes and the fact that he was a town son and made all this money and wrote a book that only liked Protestants. So,
Well, that was very common. The
Absolutely.
huge prejudice against Catholics.
Absolutely. And he was of his time. So it wouldn't have been, there would be no reason to call that Lewisboro hamlet because he wasn't even living here after about
Okay,
1815.
all right.
So not where the name came from. I think I'm surprised there's nothing on the map that says South Salem Post Office because they've had one since the early 1800s. And there was a
Well,
cross river.
maybe the date on the map is wrong.
I don't think so. No. Pouring right
Oh.
out of the book.
Okay,
So it couldn't have come in before 1840. So we've got to find maps that cover that period.
Okay,
Okay, anyone else
Thank you,
want to
guys.
share questions, anything? Our next Zoom will be on Sunday, April 11th at 3 o'clock, where we do South Salem, right?
Yes,
Maureen?
we will be doing South Salem.
And South Salem, what's the area that it's going to cover?
South Salem.
Well, what's the borders?
We'll start going we'll go north and west from Mill River. So it'll have Leon Levy. It'll have the Chateau area, and then down Route 35 to Cross River, down Spring Street, out toward well, the hamlet of South Salem, the village center. I think I'm going to include the Three Lakes all together with Wacabuck. So Wacabuck will also include, it's just easier to talk about the lakes as one thing. So it will just basically talk about that area, along Route 35, and that little bit of Smith Ridge from Mill River on up. Yeah, unless I change my mind and include the Three Lakes area, but
Well, we
and-
can count on the Three Lakes being done on the last Zoom, which will be Sunday, April 25th with Wacabuck.
yeah, if you don't hear about them in South Salem, and then it'll also have Truesdale. South Salem will have Truesdale.
Excellent. Well, we thank everyone for your attention on this rainy Sunday. We greatly appreciate you joining us. We cannot thank Maureen Cole enough for volunteering to provide this series for all of you. I will have the links tomorrow. We'll have them posted on Facebook and our website, and LCTV is using them. They're editing them to make them more time consuming
User-friendly.
for their programming. But have a great day. Enjoy the spring break for the kiddos that are off this week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks on April 11th. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thanks.